You're listening to the 3 Feet Radio Show with Ben Carbonaro and Luke Herbert. From our studios come special guests and netball commentary, exclusively on YouTube.
G'day listeners, welcome to the special ANZ Championship Grand Final edition of the 3 Feet Radio Show. Very exciting week indeed for all netball followers and netball fans and everyone else in the netball world. And joining me in the studio today is my co-host Luke. G'day Luke.
G'day Ben, and it might be freezing here in the deep south, but boy, I'm very excited about today's guest.
I most certainly am too, and joining us to preview the Grand Final is former Australian captain Ellis. G'day Liz.
G'day Ben, g'day Luke. Hopefully we'll heat things up for you.
Hope so. Just first of all, Liz, are you tipping the Queensland Firebirds or the New South Wales Swifts to win the Grand Final, and why?
Ben, it's a tough one. My gut feeling says the game is the Firebirds to lose. You know, they've been playing incredibly well. You know, they're on a 10-game winning streak or something like that. So you sort of feel like they are the form team of the competition. But I do feel that if any team is capable of beating the Firebirds when they're playing at their absolute best, it's the Swifts. And I was watching that Swift Magic semi-final, and as much as I've got a soft spot for the Magic through my involvement, of course, with their coach, Julie Fitzgerald, I did really want the Swifts to win. So I just feel like the Swifts defensive line is probably the only one that can really take it to the Firebirds. So, yeah, I'm going to tip the Firebirds, but if the Swifts play anything like they played in that first 15 minutes of that semi-final and they can do that to the full 60, then they're an excellent chance of winning as well.
And just staying with the Swifts, for the Swifts, who do you feel are the key players in the Grand Final, and who do you feel will have the biggest and most important role to play?
I reckon Julian Corletto is probably the key player for the Swifts. The thing that the Firebirds are doing far better this year than last year is really connecting between that goal attack and goal shooter position. And a lot of the pressure has come off from Elder Aiken because of the work that Gretel Tippett's doing. So if Julie Corletto can really start to steal some ball and start to really match Tippett for athleticism, then the Swifts will go a long way scoring. You know what you're going to get from Shani Lane. You know she's going to contest everything, but she needs protection out in front of her. So for mine, it comes down to Julie Corletto, and it also comes down to how well Caitlin Slade bodies up against Laura Garth. She did that really well in that first quarter of that semi and then fell away a bit in the second. And, you know, Laura Garth is playing some really fierce netball at the moment, and if Caitlin Slade can stand up to that and get back in her face, then, you know, she holds a large part of the Swiss fate in her hands.
And Liz, you mentioned Gretel Tippett. Like, she's sort of come over from the basketball, and her transition has been super. And it's certainly, like you said, taken a lot of the pressure off Aiken. Because obviously, it used to be like the casual observer to netball who didn't watch it all the time compared to what we do, would say, oh, if you can contain Romelda Aiken, you'll win the game. But it's a lot harder now to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much harder. And, yeah, you've got to contain Romelda Aiken, but you can't do that by focusing on Romelda Aiken. You've got to focus on the players out in front. And Gretel Tippett's one, and Caitlin Nevins is the other. Caitlin Nevins has a really low turnover rate, and between her and Kim Ravellian, they just do not cough the ball up. So you've got to force the error, and the player that coughs the ball up the most in that front line is Tippett, and that's where the pressure's got to be.
And just sort of a follow-up, which this may sound similar to Ben, but just to throw a different perspective on it, do you think it's fair to say that when you are going to stop a team like the Firebirds, that you basically, in layman's terms, you have to strangle off the midcourt so the ball doesn't get to the shooters in the first place?
You do, but that's just one aspect of the Firebirds. The other thing that you get caught up in talking about their front line, but the other thing that really has set them up is the fact that defensively they're the best team in the league. And it's not just their defensive line, it's everyone. So Romelda Aiken is a good defender. You know, so you've got to actually be able to transition really well and and if you get the ball, you've got to be able to bring it down court. And that's really hard to do against the Firebirds. They're a good defensive team.
And Liz, obviously, we've got the All-Australian Grand Final, but that's come through after the conference system finals. The conference system this year has been a bone of contention on both sides of the Tasman. But more importantly, what are your thoughts on it? And can you see any more teams being added to the competition in the foreseeable future?
Look, I think there will be teams added to the competition in 2017. I don't think next year is a year for change, but the year after, I think that we'll see some major changes in the league. I think there'll be teams added, but I think there'll be some structural changes as well. In terms of the conference system, you know, I'm not passionate about it either way. I understand the need for it. Yes, I know that some people don't like it, but at the end of the day, we're still got the best teams in the competition playing off in the grand final. And the Swifts have had to do it the hard way, but if you ask any of them, they'll say they don't care how they got there. So, you know, yeah, it meant for a couple of odd home games in the final series, but, you know, we'll still get the best two teams. Sky get what they want. They get more New Zealand teams in the semis, and everyone from that point of view is happy. So there's no point whinging about it. It's still given us the best possible outcome and a grand final between two of the two best teams of the competition.
Just briefly, would you like to see another team added in Australia, or would you like to see it overseas?
Look, I think it really does. I don't have a feeling one way or the other. You know, I know there's enough talent in Australia to add one, maybe two more teams if there was interest from overseas, but it depends on, you know, it all comes down to the money. Who's going to fund the teams from overseas? Is there an appetite? Do they have a live broadcasting base that can maybe fund that's attractive to the league? It's not just what someone like me as a former player would like. It's actually what's best for the league. And, you know, Netball Australia have had to pump some money into it in the last few years, and I reckon they're at a point now where they should be able to start to see some return on investment. And, you know, they will have to figure out the best way to do that. And the Trans-Tasman League as an entity has to figure out the best way to get that return on investment. Because that's an overseas team, and that's great. If it's more teams in Australia, then, you know, that's great as well, as long as the league keeps moving.
And Liz, we'll obviously see you on our TV screens calling the game on Sunday. What's involved before you actually go and call a game? I know, for example, with my writing and when I've done radio before, like previewing games, I usually try and have a page of notes and some stats in front of me. Do you usually do that, or what else do you do? Because there's a lot of people that wouldn't know how much preparation goes in before you call a game.
Yeah, look, most preparation for me actually goes in watching last week's games. I like to know what teams are up to and what they look like in their last outing and who's doing what. I read generally. I sort of, you know, try and read as many newspaper articles as I can to see what the players are saying. I follow them on social media. In terms of stats, I've sort of got a few in front of me. I actually don't turn up with notes simply because I've done that before, and I find that if I'm looking and referring to my notes, I'm actually not watching what's going on the court. So my job is to really interpret what's happening on court. So I need all the background research that I can get in my head and the knowledge that's in my head to help explain why things are happening. So my job as a colour commentator is not to tell people what's happening. That's Kelly's job. It's my job to tell people why it's happening, and referring to notes isn't going to help that for me. So, you know, I've got a fairly large knowledge bank, and I try and add to that during the week just by watching games and doing some general research. But when it comes to the game, I might turn up with 3 or 4 dot points that I think are worthwhile. I'll jot down any key players for the team who are leading stats and where they're coming. But if I have to look down to see that Gretel Tippett has the most turnovers of any player in the league, I'm actually not watching the game. I need to have that information well and truly in my brain before the game starts. So I do try and watch the game as much as possible, look at the stats screen as much as possible, interpreting what's happening in front of me rather than thinking too much about what my notes might say.
And I just want to switch up gears here a little bit. Looking ahead to the Netball World Cup, and from your perspective as a player, what are the main differences when it comes to preparing for a tournament where you're playing a game every day compared to a regular international tour where, you know, you usually have time in between each test?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things. The first thing is that you've got to get used to playing day by day. The most important thing in that is recovery. And as a player, you actually do a fair bit of work in the months leading up to figure out what works best for you in recovery in terms of ice baths, massage, what food you should eat, what you should drink after the game. So all the players will go into the tournament knowing what the best form of recovery is for them. The Diamonds have done a lot of work on sleep recovery as well and the role it plays. It sounds a little bit clean, but it's actually, sleep is vitally important in your recovery process. So that's the thing that you focus on is your recovery rather than how to play a game. You can't play a game unless you're recovering. The other thing that's different is, you know, if you're in the Aussie team, then you're probably playing full games with your National League team. But when it comes to the tournament play, you might be coming on at half time or 3/4 time or only playing the first half. And that's just a different mental mindset that you have to get used to actually coming on and being at that high intensity at half time or quarter time or 3/4 time. Because you get played in short bursts rather than playing full games at a time. So there's just a little bit of mental, change up that you have to do just to make sure that you can be a player who can come off the bench or who can go to the bench at half time and still contribute. Things that you might not normally do in ANZ Champs.
And Liz, just how excited are you for netball to be displayed as passionately as it is coming up to the Netball World Cup? Obviously in your home state of New South Wales, and because the last one was in 1991, 2 years before you made your international debut against Wales at The Hague.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I'm excited on sort of two fronts. I'm excited because I think it will give the game a huge boost in terms of the broadcast, and you know, Channel 10 and Foxtel are going to have hours and hours of netball, which is really exciting. So it would be great to see people get behind that, so we can show the broadcast there's a huge interest in our sport. But I'm also excited at the other level. When I think back to the last World Cup in Sydney in '91, I was there as an 18-year-old. And it is what inspired me to take that next step and play for Australia. And I'm excited to think about the young players who are at that sub-elite level who might be inspired to take that next step. And the young kids who haven't even thought about playing netball, who look at the World Cup and say, I'm going to be for that action. So on so many levels, it's a really exciting time for the sport. And the great thing is, is that I've got a huge amount of confidence in the work that's been done behind the scenes that will be able to capitalise on the World Cup. It's one thing having your event, but you've got to have plans in place to capitalise on that afterwards, and I'm confident that that's happening.
Well, I certainly think that it is, the Australian Diamonds World Cup, and I certainly think they're the favourites going into it. But again, we have to switch up gears here a little bit. And I want to sort of move back towards the ANZ Championship. And this is sort of a two-part question. So I'll start with part one. Would you like to see any rule changes trialled in the ANZ Championship next year?
Not next year. I think, there's got to be a fair amount of, planning that goes on in terms of rule changes. And you know what? I reckon our game's pretty good as it is. And the only rule change that I would like to see is, the interpretation of the rules rather than the actual rules themselves. So, I'm on record almost ad nauseum saying the players are big and strong and tough and they can take a body knock. So I would like to see the umpires pull less contact, let a little bit more push and shove go in order to get the ball. It's not going to deter from the game. The thing that deters from our game growing is the fact that when the casual observer tunes in to a netball telecast, the amount of whistle that they hear turns them off, and they don't understand why things are being pulled. So, especially on the other side of the Tasman in New Zealand, you wouldn't be a defender for Quinn, and it's hard to watch. And that's the thing I think needs to change. The rules of the game are fine. It's the interpretation of the rules that needs to change.
Liz, do you feel the rule interpretations could be sort of sorted out a bit? What people have said many times, I've said it publicly myself too, is that could it be avoided by having an Australian umpire and a Kiwi umpire every week? But then you talk to people like, of course, our good friend Kate Palmer at Netball Australia. G'day, Kate, if you are listening today. Has said that while that's a great idea, it can't happen because of dollars. That could be the reason to sort it out, or is there another reason that could fix the interpretation issue?
Oh, look, I think it's a lot like. I think it's a bit like putting an Australian and New Zealand umpire on each game. It's not going to make them change. You're not going to find a happy medium. So there probably needs to be some fairly across the board change in umpire education, I guess, especially in New Zealand, to say to them, you don't have to pull every single physical touch that you see. And then they're not going to change their mind just because they're on a game with an Australian umpire. Actually, the change needs to come from almost way below that elite level, changing it at a sub-elite level as the umpires come through. This is how you need to think about the game. Don't think about it in terms of you're here to make sure the players don't do anything wrong. Actually think about it in terms of how can you facilitate the game so the game can flow.
Just before we leave the topic of umpiring, and Ben and I have discussed this on and off air, but the most, I don't want to say obvious, but the best sort of example I can think of where I think the interpretation of the rules need to change is, and we talked about it in our last show as well, is, if a player gets pushed offside, the player who's gone offside is penalised and not the player who shoved them. Do you think that's the kind of way the rules could be interpreted differently without ripping up the rule book?
No, I don't have. I watch God knows how many games I watch a year, and I don't think that's a major problem. If the umpire sees the shove happen, they'll pull the shove. If they see a player go offside, they'll pull the offside, and it depends whether they've seen a shove or not. So I don't think that's a major issue. I think the bigger issue is, let the contest for the ball happen.
And just switching gears again, Liz, the Centurions and the tour attached with it is coming up in August. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Centurions. It's a little bit of fun. Actually, it's a lot of fun. Kat Fox, Sherelle McMahon and myself are three of the four players who have played 100 test matches for Australia. Vicky Wilson's the other one. But she'll be coached to the enemy, I guess, when we wanted to have our show on. So I'm having one show during the World Cup in August 10 at the Enmore Theatre. It's going to be just so much fun. There's lots to talk about netball, but I guess people will get to see the other side of us as well, away from the netball court, and hear some stories about not only our career but our lives. And it should be a great show. Sue Gordian is hosting it. She put a lot of work into it. It's a 2.5-hour show, and it's proving really popular. All the A Reserve tickets are sold out. Lots of people are sort of lining up to get their shot at listening to us and watching us make fools of ourselves. So, as well as being fairly focused on netball, there'll also be a fair bit of comedy in there as well.
And speaking to Sue Gordian, the day I bumped into her in the corridors at one of the games, she was telling me that no Melbourne dates yet. And I said to her, "Come on, Gordy, it needs to come to Melbourne, because I know that there's many netball fans down here in Victoria, Liz, that would love to or want to hear all the stories from your playing career and the other girls too. So please bring it to Melbourne. I know I'll be in the front row."
Then we'd love to. It does depend on money. What we've discovered is producing your own show, your own theatre show. costs money, so we'll see how we go with his first one in Sydney, and if we can sort of if it goes well, if we enjoy it, if the show's a success, and if we make enough money to get us together a little fighting fund, then yeah, we'd love to take it on the road next year.
And Liz, my tip for the grand final, of course, would be the Queensland Firebirds. Might be a bit of bias. Of course, you know about my love for Laura Geitz, but that's a story for another day. And Luke, who's your tip for the grand final?
Well, I'm going to go with heart over head. I'm tipping the Swifts just because Jade Clark is going to look rather great, to say the least, holding the ANZ Championship trophy.
All right, Liz, thanks very much for joining us today. It was good to chat, and no doubt in what is a busy week for you.
My pleasure, boys. Great to chat.
You've been listening to the 3 Feet Radio Show with Ben Carbonaro and Luke Herbert. Tune in next time for more special guests and netball commentary exclusively on YouTube.